Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy.
They said, sir, I just think it's inappropriate for you to say. I said, well, I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. 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 Whether the women like it or not.
We're going to talk about that clip in a second. We'll also be talking with our guest, Gretchen Carlson. She's back in the back room. But first, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you listening. And we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So let's talk about that for a second, because I can't get that out of my head since the first time I heard it. I was watching cable news all morning today, and not once did I hear anyone point out that an adjudicated rapist said that he's going to do things to women, quote, whether the women like it or not. It's chilling that he said this, but it's even more stunning that no one is making that connection. They're talking about it in this, again, normalized way of like, oh, look what Trump said. No, look what an adjudicated rapist said. This has been his pattern his whole life. That's his MO. Grab them by the pussy, whether they like it or not. Walk into a dressing room at a beauty pageant with underage girls, whether they like it or not. Rape them in a dressing room, in a department store, whether they like it or not. Take away their reproductive rights, whether they like it or not. That isn't the story. Days before the election, that a man who has spent his entire fucking life exploiting and assaulting women and doing things to them, whether they like it or not. It's beyond me.
It's an excellent point you make, really, that it's just that there are so many fires to put out all the time. And it is kind of stunning that this one sort of went unrecognized.
This is the problem with our media. What he said has not gone unrecognized. They've been playing it all morning and talking about it all morning. But they're talking about it as if some dude just came out of nowhere and said this. This is a man who a court, a judge, found liable for rape. Rape. And what is rape? Sexually assaulting someone, whether they like it or not. That connective tissue to me, being absent, is staggering.
Well, the media has played this entire campaign as if both sides are equal in some way. And we just saw this as what you just said is of course true, but we also saw this with the garbage conflict.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Biden said nothing wrong. And yet Trump, they have montages of him calling everyone human garbage and scum 1,000 times.
Well,
I mean, that's not even hyperbole.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And yesterday I was watching the news for a while, and Trump was sitting in the garbage truck, which, by the way, the irony, the deliciousness of this man not recognizing the colossal self-own of him sitting in a fucking garbage truck with a Trump logo on it, pretending to be a garbage man. They're letting him talk for 10 minutes and peppering it here and there with questions. But no one, not one reporter said, but sir, in just the last several days, you have called Kamala Harris's people garbage, and in what was billed as your closing argument, you referred to America, the entire fucking country, as a garbage can. How do you sit in that truck right now condemning Kamala Harris for something she didn't even say? This is the thing. Donald Trump is not held accountable for things Donald Trump says. Kamala Harris is held accountable for things President Biden says. Talk about your double standards and your false equivalencies.
It's incomprehensible, but it's consistent. The media has completely failed, with the exception of a few outlets. They don't hold him accountable, and this is what we've seen since 2016.
Yeah, he sits in a truck, high and mighty.
Garbage truck.
High and mighty on his pile of trash with his little costume. He's like my grandson, Koopy Doopy.
When he doesn't dress up, he creates NFTs to make dress up for him.
Well, let's go back to the media for a minute. Do you remember after 2016, the media started to do a mea culpa? And then after January 6th, the media was, very present. What happened in the last 3 years where everyone's so fucking afraid of him again?
Everyone from Lindsey Graham to Jeff Bezos, they're all terrified.
I think they're afraid of him winning again. And someone like Jeff Bezos, basically billionaires with giant government contracts shouldn't own newspapers, because the reality is if Kamala Harris wins, she's not going to retaliate against anyone who said bad things about her. If Trump wins, he's literally said he thinks that Mark Zuckerberg should go to prison. And he tried to put Hillary Clinton in prison. We found out after the fact that he asked his attorney general to arrest her, to arrest all of the Bidens. And so they have good reason to fear right now because he has a decent chance of winning.
Well, it's rhetoric they're afraid of, but they are also the ones in the driver's seats and have the power. And if they collectively did something about it, they wouldn't have anything to fear because he's just a blowhard. But again, with the media for the next 4 days should only ask Donald Trump 4 questions. Did you lose the 2020 election? Are white supremacists and Nazis bad? What, quote unquote, good things did Hitler do? And why are you condemning Biden for saying garbage when you called Democrats garbage and called America a garbage can? That's it. Don't let him control the news cycle. And that's what it's been for the last 24 hours. It's infuriating to watch it happen. And it's infuriating that the media is partly responsible for Donald Trump being in a dead heat 5 days from the election.
Absolutely.
I mean, look, there's a lot of great people in the news business. And I have a love for journalism. That's what my degree is. I think without journalism, we have no democracy. But we almost don't have a democracy. And why is it? Because the fourth estate has failed us. Letting these people normalize all of this crap, especially Trump. What did you guys think of the closing argument speech, the MSG rally?
The Nazi rally?
The Nazi rally.
I find myself watching this shit that I really shouldn't be spending my time doing, but I had to watch it. And I mean, it was scary as fuck. I couldn't believe what I was watching. However, 20,000 people at Madison Square Garden isn't really as many people as you think, right? I mean,
considering that there's 30 million people in the 5 boroughs, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Long Island, no, it's not a lot. Andrew Dice Clay filled Madison Square Garden.
Hickory Dickory Dock. Whoa. Yes, I remember.
1990. Okay, so you could find 20,000 people.
Absolutely.
And he was also not terribly funny and angry. So
it's true. So I honestly had thought that we had gone as low as we were going to go. And then the shark just jumped. And then I watched Melania come out. And what do you think it was like $5 million she got paid? And she forgot to make eye contact, so maybe she got docked $500,000. Like, that was the coldest reception between a married couple that I've seen ever.
I think there was more sexual tension between me and my late grandmother when we would greet each other. And
I mean, it's just like Madonna.
The handshaking, no holding hands,
and no eye contact.
No, honestly, if you look at everything that they've done and he's said in the last week, it's as if they're campaigning to lose.
It was a shit show. I call it the Bridge and Tunnel Rally. I don't think there was more than maybe 5 people from Manhattan.
You don't think the place was filled with West Villagers?
Or West Siders.
Upper West Siders?
Upper West Siders. Oh, maybe.
I mean, Love Fest? This was a Love Fest? I guess if you consider that Donald Trump hates black and brown people and 20,000 people came because they love him for it, then I guess it was a love fest. What about her speech at the Ellipse?
It was great. And she had a much bigger crowd. Apparently 75,000 people came for that. And of course, I'm sure he said there were 200,000 at Madison Square Garden, even though they technically only hold 19,000.
He said there were millions outside lined up. Millions. He literally said that.
Millions.
Really?
I don't know.
Millions?
I don't know how they
Millions.
could get there because Times Square, apparently, which is nearby, has been taken over by gangs, according to him.
Yeah.
She did a great job. I think Michelle Obama hit it home. When you think about the people who are undecided, I feel like the closing arguments spotlight who each candidate is. So I swear to God, if somebody says undecided one more time, my head's going to explode.
She did draw great distinctions between her and him. She was presidential, and he was a fucking maniac, surrounded by fucking maniacs.
Yes.
We know that Donald Trump is scared shitless because he's already claiming Pennsylvania's rigged. You know, he's not a complicated man. He has very simple tells. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised, but he's zeroing in on Pennsylvania because he knows that's probably where the closest race is going to be. She seems to be pulling ahead in Wisconsin and Michigan quite nicely.
Yeah, I think his internal polls, which we don't see, are probably showing a loss for Pennsylvania because they have real people doing their internal polls. They're not all nut jobs.
I was going to say she's gaining with women. She's gaining with blacks and now Hispanics, Latinos, Puerto Ricans in particular, which, by the way, it's important to point out how many Puerto Ricans there are in Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona. There's almost 500,000 Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania alone. Like, that was the biggest unforced error in the history of politics. But Donald Trump's, interestingly, in a new CNN poll, he's underperforming in his own base. He's lost about 20 to 25% of white non-college voters.
What?
Yeah, in that CNN poll, which I'm going to go through with Gretchen in a few minutes, he's losing an appreciable piece of the biggest part of his base. So those things combined, not a good look for him in Pennsylvania, which is why I think he's coming out so strongly with this whole rigged. You know, they found 2,500 registrations that were not properly signed. It wasn't even votes. It's registrations. It was paperwork.
I mean, they're going to make shit up no matter what. And thankfully, you know, his strongest base is a very small percentage, and that would be Nazis and white supremacists.
And I'm saying this to my fellow Jews because I can't hear any more Jews talk about how they're voting for Trump. Seriously, Jews, let me just remind you of 3 words: Holocaust, okay? But for my fellow Jews, when you see these boats and trucks with the Trump flags and the swastikas, why do you think the Nazis like Trump? Just a little morsel I'm throwing out at you now to think about it. We'll come back. We can come back to that another time. But just think about that after this episode is over.
Can we also lump in the Arabs who are supporting him?
Oh,
the
yeah.
Muslims.
Yeah, the Muslims.
Sorry, we don't have to. Arabs are a wide swath. We talk about the Muslims who are supporting
Sure, because
him.
Donald Trump's going to be great for Gaza. Great.
Fantastic.
Gaza might be
just
the
had to
new.
put it out there.
Gaza might be the new capital of Israel.
But can you imagine the size of the Trump Tower that we're going to have there? I mean, it's going to be huge.
You know
Huge.
but you know that Jared wants to build waterfront resorts in Gaza. That's his vision, to turn it into another Trump vacation mecca.
Inshallah.
Yeah.
They're moving ahead with that.
Yeah. So yeah, and to your point, Jen, like Muslim bans, mass deportations. The new thing is now take the kids, even if they're U.S. citizens.
Yeah.
This is their answer. When the question is, how do you propose to mass deport undocumented immigrants when they have children who are U.S. citizens? And their answer, without any shame, is to say they'll all be deported.
Well, it's
They're actually,
yes.
They're campaigning on deporting U.S. citizens. Think about that for a second.
Well, when you have SCOTUS in your back pocket, it certainly makes these constitutional rights, or rules, legislation, they're relevant.
Well, you'll be deported, Andy.
Yeah, for sure. Bye.
Depends where they send me. I'm not going to get upset about it until I know where they're going to send me.
Where do you think they might send you?
I don't know. Maybe south of France would be nice.
Okay.
Yeah, there you are.
All right, let's get to our winners and losers.
My winner, the economy. Lower gas prices, cooling inflation, higher wages right now translates to sound policies led by a Democrat. My loser, SCOTUS. By placing its thumb on the election scale, allowing Virginia to purge 1,600 voters within a week of the election.
My loser is Cantor Fitzgerald Chief Executive Howard Lutnick, who managed to actually say that to make America great, we have to go back to 1900, when there was no income tax and everything was paid for with tariffs. And of course, women couldn't vote. It was a great time. My winner, because this is the last chat we're going to have before the election, is going to be a prediction. My winner will be Harris-Walz.
My winner, Kamala Harris, who in this final week before the election continues to demonstrate her intelligence, strength, qualifications, and presidential temperament. My loser, also the U.S. Supreme Court, which on Wednesday, in a vague one-page decision, ruled that Virginia can continue to purge suspected non-citizens from voter registration rolls, a move which the Biden administration, Democrats, and the lower courts fear will disenfranchise validated U.S. citizens from voting. All right, it's time for the rant, which is actually going to be my closing argument. Folks, this is important. The contrast between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris and the Republican Party and the Democratic Party is as stark as it can be. In these final 4 days before Election Day, please consider these truths as you cast your vote. Only one party fights to have women control their bodies, is fighting climate change and catastrophic weather, is protecting your health care, supports public education, fights for gun reform, has achieved the greatest economy in decades, believes in immigration reform, believes in LGBTQ plus rights, fights anti-Semitism and racism, protects voting rights, believes in free and fair elections, believes in the rule of law, cherishes our democracy, believes in civility and respect for others. And that's the Democratic Party, whose candidate promises to unite the country and be a president for all Americans, a candidate who delivers positive, uplifting messages and talks of America's greatness. While Trump campaigns on anger, cruelty, hate, racism, grievance, vengeance, darkness, and divisiveness, who calls America a, quote, garbage can, and who's becoming more mentally unhinged with each passing day. I ask you to consider why staunch, lifelong conservatives, including Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, Jeff Duncan, Alberto Gonzalez, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and hundreds of former aides to Bush, Mitt Romney, and John McCain have endorsed Harris. I ask you to consider why over 700 national security leaders and former military officials signed a letter endorsing Harris. I ask you to consider why retired general and former Trump chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, said Trump is, quote, fascist to the core and, quote, the most dangerous person to this country. I ask you to consider why former Trump Secretary of Defense Mark Esper warns that Trump will use the military against U.S. citizens who oppose him. I ask you to consider why former Trump Chief of Staff John Kelly said Trump is, quote, a person who admires autocrats and murderous dictators, a person that has nothing but contempt for our democratic institutions, our Constitution, and the rule of law. So, I'd like you to think about what kind of America you want to live in, what kind of role models you want for your children, because we must choose between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And it's not simply a choice between Democrat or Republican. It's a choice between compassion and cruelty, civility and insolence, inclusion and divisiveness, truth and lies, reality and delusion, good and evil, democracy and autocracy, patriotism or treason, and progress or regression. In the end, it doesn't matter whether you vote for Harris or against Trump. But please, I urge you with every fiber of my being to vote for Kamala Harris so we can begin turning the page on this ugly chapter and begin the healing process. Because we all deserve so much better than Donald Trump, and because America will not survive another 4 years of him. All right, let's get to Gretchen Carlson. She is an acclaimed journalist, New York Times bestselling author, speaker, and advocate for women's rights in the workplace. She went public in 2016 with harassment claims against then Fox News chairman and CEO Roger Ailes, paving the way for the Me Too movement. Her story's been told in the movie Bombshell and the Showtime miniseries The Loudest Voice. Gretchen spent over 30 years as a journalist and has hosted the Saturday edition of CBS's The Early Show, Fox and Friends, and The Real Story with Gretchen Carlson. She is co-founder of Lift Our Voices, a nonprofit organization fighting to eradicate forced arbitration clauses and non-disclosure agreements in workplace contracts that keep toxic workplace issues silent. And she is dedicated to helping create safe, welcoming, and harassment-free environments in workplaces all across the world. Gretchen, welcome back into the back room.
Great to be with you again.
So I want to start with something that I can't stop thinking about, which happened yesterday. Of course, the big news, Donald Trump promised to be the great protector yet again of women, but this time he threw in a little caveat and said, I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. So given your background, your personal experiences with sexual harassment, given the great work you do with your organization, when you heard that, what went through your mind?
His advisors were having a heart attack behind the scenes, that he actually admitted that his advisors had told him, do not say this. And then he came out. And then, to your point, he just made it worse, that he doesn't care what women think about this. When this first came out about a month ago, and I was doing a hit on CNN, I actually said that this is the Handmaid's Tale. This is exactly what people were fearing when they were watching that whole series about how women are just taken over and everyone else who's any kind of a protected class doesn't exist anymore in the state in which they do today. And I don't know how much more clear we can be about that as far as the threat. Forget the threat to democracy. I mean, that's still sitting out there, but this is a threat to all women in the United States of America, all protected classes, because it's not just going to be women that he's going to come after. He's already signaled he's going to deport every immigrant, whether or not you're here legally.
Yeah, right.
So,
or if their kids are here legally, he's actually going to deport U.S. citizens.
And change the fact that when you're born in this country, you're not a citizen if, for whatever reason, your parents came from somebody else, somewhere else, which, by the way, we all did. So it's just, look, it's so frustrating to me on the women front in so many different ways, because as you recall, 9-10 years ago, when he first decided he was running for office, a lot of women came forward and said that they had been either sexually harassed or sexually assaulted by Donald Trump. A lot of them that did not go public came to me personally, secretly, and, wondered what my advice would be about them coming forward. And all of them did not, because they saw what happened to those other women who did. And those women who did come forward publicly also reached out to me and said, how could you potentially have found justice in your case? And we're not. And that you could be elected president just based on that. And, I don't have a good answer for that other than to say that he is not a CEO of a corporation as president of the United States. The board can't fire him, right? I mean, I guess Congress tried to impeach him and did, but that didn't do anything. But it's up to the people in our country to elect him. And so he serves at the behest of people. And so it's a different kind of scenario from, being able to get rid of Roger Ailes at Fox News. And since that time, he's been convicted of sexual assault with E. Jean Carroll and owes her like $1 gajillion.
Well, here's the thing. I'm glad you brought that up, because I was watching the cable news this morning. Not one commentator, not one anchor, no one connected the dots that an adjudicated rapist has said he's going to do something to women, whether they like it or not. It's just, to me, a furthering of the normalization. It's like, oh, Trump said something yesterday. Let's talk about it. No, a rapist said he's going to do something to women, whether they like it or not. This is how he treats women. This is how he views women. How is that not the story today?
I did see it in some print articles when it first came out last night. As you know, I've been doing commentary on CNN and MSNBC this political season, and I mean, I'm going to be on talking about this. I mean, trust me, I will make the link. Okay, I will make the link. But you're right. I mean, I think I wrote, or I definitely wrote an op-ed after he was elected in 2016 in the New York Times. And the point of the op-ed was, I believe that it is completely wrong to disavow all of those women who bravely came forward and courageously told their stories and say, I'm still going to vote for Donald Trump because I like his policies. I mean, what kind of message is that sending, not just to my generation and yours, but to our children, for God's sake, you know? And yes, I'm very close to this because I've lived through a horrible experience and situation. I've tried to make it better for millions of other people. So my children are front and center when I think about these issues. But what are we, like years from now, when we look back on this, what is just that one message about how he allegedly got away with this treatment of women? How is that going to sit with our next generation? We're already seeing it play out in, I believe, the growth of these bro podcasts and the popularity of all of that. I mean, no one's ever going to tell me that that did not come out of his rhetoric. And it's almost like, you know, just look at my Twitter feed. You know, it's almost like he's given license to every racist and every misogynist sitting in their basement.
Yeah, you get some awful stuff.
Up until that, up until that point, you know, they had at least culturally learned that it probably wasn't smart to be public about it. But now he's given the green, you know, so.
But it's also like the Klan hoods have come off. The Nazis have eaten dinner in the White House. Like, it's all of it. It's all of the above.
Mm-hmm. So I guess my biggest pet peeve, and I've got a lot of them, is when I hear somebody say, well, I like his policies. I can get past his rhetoric and how he treats women and how he treats every other, you know, protected class. I can get past that because I don't want to pay higher taxes and because I'm scared of the border. You know, I disagree with that. And I'm a person of conviction, and I just don't think I could look in the eyes of my children and say that I'm not going to at least look at those issues seriously before I would make any sort of decision.
Yeah, well, it harkens back to the time you were referring to right after the election. This was right after the Access Hollywood scandal, which we thought was going to kill his campaign. That should have been a sign that, we're in trouble if this didn't kill the campaign. But, and I don't mean to be graphic, but I have to use the right language to emphasize the point. There were women at his rallies with T-shirts with an arrow pointed down that said, he can grab my pussy anytime. And I remember thinking, really? Can he grab your daughter's private parts? Like, what world are we living in where this behavior is now normal and okay?
Well, and ironically, Billy Bush, who was on that tape, is the one who lost his job. Now, I'm not giving him, you know, any slack. He participated in it, but I think to a lesser extent than Trump did. And Trump had he was not penalized at all. Another irony of that day, Andy, is that I will never forget where I was because I was in a cab in New York City because I had ironically just shot the cover for Time magazine for my story. It was like the first thing I was doing in actually giving an interview and coming to be public after my case in July of 2016. So it was like, whoa, like that came out, and it was this emblematic day for me. And I thought the same thing you did. I thought, well, that's going to do it. And that didn't do it. And we've seen a million other things that have done nothing.
And we see these double standards in the media and elsewhere. We see the false equivalencies, the garbage scandal this week. I was watching the news yesterday. Trump was sitting in his garbage truck, which is a delicious self-own that he's completely clueless about, but he's sitting in the truck. The reporters are asking him questions, and he's just ranting about Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and the attack on his supporters as garbage. Not one reporter said, sir, but you've referred to her supporters and Democrats as garbage, and just this week at your closing argument called the entire country a garbage can.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's why nothing ever happens, because it's never dealt with the right way.
You know, some sociologists, psychologists going to have a field day with this, like I said, in a couple of years. Maybe it's that because he initially got away with every crazy thing that was said, that reporters now just don't push back because they know that he's Teflon Trump anyway. I don't know. I don't know the psychology of it. I do know that I've seen on cable news when they're reporting about that they do bring up, all the other things that he has said. And I would just point out that President Biden said the one comment, I don't think it was the right thing to say,
Mm-hmm.
but Donald Trump has said 50 million comments. So it's not equal. And also, I just want to make sure I say, Andy, that I actually think, cheap things. We found out why President Biden isn't on the ticket. Okay. But number two, I actually think that in a weird way, that was somewhat of a gift to Kamala Harris, because she should have done it more so before, but distance herself from some of the Biden administration because of the cost of living and the high gas prices and the high grocery prices and all of that. That's what people are going to probably end up thinking about before they go to vote. At least that's what history has said about your pocketbook. And so I actually think it was a gift for her, and I think she handled it wonderfully, to come out and disavow it in a strong way and set herself apart. I think that was really, really important.
Van Jones said Trump gets to be lawless. Kamala Harris has to be flawless. I'll take it a step further with regard to what we're seeing this week. It's like Donald Trump is not held accountable for things Donald Trump says, but Kamala Harris is held accountable for things Joe Biden has said. It's like, if I was her, I'd be like, dudes, he's not running.
I know, in that big picture again, these are the kinds of things I think about in the middle of the night.
You and me both.
Will Donald Trump be the only political candidate ever in the United States of America that gets away with crap like that? That's what I lay awake at night thinking about. And I think at first in the Republican primaries, I was thinking, I think a lot of other people are going to be able to get away with this stuff, because you had somebody like Vivek Ramaswamy who was saying as crazier things than Trump was, and he was going up in the polls. But then he really just shattered and went away when he really got crazy. So I'm back to the more optimistic opinion that for whatever reason, Donald Trump gets away with this stuff, but that it will only be him. At least that's my hope for our political future. And, if he loses this election, and I've said this before, I think that the gravest error, and it will go down in history in the Republican Party, was not getting rid of him on January 6th when they could. Mm-hmm. If he loses, the Republican Party maybe has a chance to realign themselves to some sort of normalcy. Maybe they'll be relieved that they can move in a different direction. I don't know. But at night, I think to myself, okay, maybe it's only him, and we can ultimately save this country.
It's really interesting you say that, because I say the same thing to myself, because there really isn't anyone, even though they've tried, there's no one that can do what he does. And my reason for it is that he's a sociopath. So when you're not tethered to reality, when you have no compassion, no empathy, no feelings, I often say, like, if they cut up his chest and looked inside, he's the shark from Jaws. Like, there's beer cans, there's like little fish, there's all kinds of things in there except actual human organs that allow someone to feel, to empathize, and have compassion for other people. He also just thinks only in the 3 to 5 seconds in front of him. So that's what, like, if I said to you, your shirt is white, if you're Donald Trump, you'd be like, no, it's not. It's plaid. It's plaid. He doesn't care whether the whole world is going, is he crazy? It's white. So it's just when he feels threatened, he'll just say whatever. And, as someone who has crippling insecurities, he's constantly feeling threatened, which is why he's constantly in grievance mode, and he's constantly threatening revenge. So I agree with you. I don't think there's ever going to be anyone like him. But my concern is it going to matter? Because if he wins, it's not going to matter that he's the only one, because I think we're done. I really do, because as you know, the ecosystem that he has now, the guardrails are down, the Kellys are gone, the Mattises are gone. anybody who said, no, we can't do that, all the people who were like, I stayed with him just to protect America. Those people are gone. Now you got Stephen Miller and Bannon and Kash Patel and Rudy Giuliani. Like, that's who's going to be running the country. And he's got the highest court in the land in his pocket. So this is terrifying stuff. With 5 days left, what's your feeling about how things are going? Are there undecideds?
Just before I answer that, let me just add on to what you said, and not to be Debbie Downer. But I think one other really important point about this sort of evolution of Donald Trump in America is that his way in which he thinks, in which he looks at my shirt and says, that's plaid, but it's really white. He has been able to transfer that to at least 30 to 35% of the American public, where they don't believe anything anymore either.
Right.
They don't. When he says something on videotape, they don't believe it, because somehow in their brains, they're thinking, well, that was edited, or, or that's not a real tape, or that. So I think the danger is way past who he might have in his administration. I think it's that he's indoctrinated, a big group of people to not believe in the truth anymore.
That's a great point.
That to me is really, as a journalist, that to me is so scary, because that's how we've survived for all of this time, right? Back to your question about polls. So there was an interesting CNN poll that came out last night that I was talking about in the swing states. It was Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. I was fascinated to see that in those 3 states, 6% of people are still undecided. That's big. That's a big number. If you look back in August when they did the same question, it was 15%. So that makes more sense, because Kamala had just come on the stage, and people didn't feel like they knew that much about her. And so they were probably many more undecided. I still think 6% is a huge number. This thing may go, like, all of these swing states may be 1%, maybe 1,000 votes. Who knows? So that to me was interesting. And then you have to analyze, okay, what's the one thing that's going to make those 6% go for Trump or go for Harris? And what I was arguing last night was feeling of, she just said something that put me over the edge. He just said something that put me over the edge. I don't really think endorsements work that much in pushing people, but in the last week before an election, when you have that many undecideds, it could be somebody who watched her speech on the ellipse. That made me really feel, powerful. Or I didn't like that, so I'm voting for Trump. I really believe emotion and feeling comes into play in an election this close at the end. And that's why we don't know. And I don't want to be a naysayer about the polls either. I hope that they, gotten their Donald Trumpism or whatever it is to figure out who his voters really are, so that we are really sort of looking at this close election. But who knows? Who knows? You have to vote. You have to vote.
Yeah.
You have to turn out and vote, because that's what it is right now.
Well, the CNN poll that you cite, there's a few interesting things in that. She seems to be pulling away in Michigan and Wisconsin, still struggling in Pennsylvania, but he's also underperforming in his own base. He's lost about 20 to 25% of white non-college voters. If true, that's hugely consequential for him, no?
Yes, because she has picked up a lot of those voters. The other strategy that's more risky for Donald Trump and his team is that they're banking, they've gone full in on the bro culture. But they're banking on a huge group of men who usually don't vote. These are the people that tend to be Trump supporters. So the risk in that is, do those people actually go out and vote, right? I mean, for people like you and me who are watching this and eating it up every single day and know every detail and would never not vote. Unfortunately, there's, millions of people in America that don't see it as a privilege. And, it's just like, hey, I don't feel like getting off the couch. I'm not going to go vote today, right? Or, hey, I want to vote, but I forgot to register, or whatever the case is. That's a risky strategy for him to think that all of those people will just show up if they've never voted before and it's not in ecosystem to understand that,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I think that's riskier than Trump saying those comments about women and Harris leading on the reproductive right issue by a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just add one more thing. We have not had a national election of this magnitude about abortion yet.
Mm.
I mean, when you really look at this is a 50-state referendum on Roe v. Wade and abortion. In many of those states, there are state laws that are also on the ballot. And so how is that? There's been no polling on that because there's no history of it. So we don't know how many women or men, shouldn't just be a women's issue, how many men might be flipped as a result.
Sure, girl dads. But here's the barometer that gives me solace, and that is since Dobbs in 2022, Democrats and every ballot initiative, referendum on abortion, everything has gone to the Democrats, with the exception of the House, which was supposed to be a 40 to 50 seat red wave, was 4 seats. They cannot win. So I say, okay, what would make that trend change at a time where Donald Trump and Republicans are saying the most awful things about women? And I mean, the laws that we have already in Texas, women are dying in this country already. And so the gender gap, which was also pointed out in that CNN poll, do you think that, given what we're talking about, are we going to see something we haven't seen ever before? There's a part of me that personally feels like it's going to be a landslide. It's a long shot if we were at the racetrack, but I just feel like, how can it not be?
Yeah, 2 points to that. I do feel like abortion is underestimated as far as the list of important issues in these polls. I think that I think it's just higher. I think it's higher based on what you said about 2022 than is being reflected in the polls. Actually, 3 points. Number 2, Jesse Waters on Fox News. Hate to bring up Fox News because I don't watch them anymore, but unfortunately I see the headlines. He said that if his wife, which by the way, whom he had an affair with when he was married to somebody else, she was his producer at Fox. Why that's relevant is because he said that if she voted secretly for Kamala Harris when she goes in to cast her ballot, that would be to him like she was having an affair with somebody else. Okay?
Yeah. That's the same. It's the same thing.
I use that story to point out that I do think, and I don't want to jinx it, but I do think that there are some women, maybe many in this country, whose husbands are rampant Donald Trump supporters, who the women feel as if they have to go along with the storyline, right? Mm-hmm. But maybe when they get there in private, and Julia Roberts actually has a commercial out about this right now, you can do whatever you want. Mm-hmm. You get in there. Could that be what we're not seeing in the polls? Because they're never going to admit that. And by the way, you just would happen to have to get that person to be one of your respondents. So that's number 2. And number 3, there's actually hard evidence right now, aside from polls, which are squishy, that shows that by a 10-point margin, women have voted early over men. 10-point margin. Now, we don't know who they're voting for, but what does that say? Does that say that there's more women because they believe abortion's murder and they're going to make sure that they get Donald Trump back in there? Or is that 10-point gain because women, first of all, are much more conscientious about voting in bigger numbers? And is that because they want to make sure that their vote goes in early, just psychologically, that it counts, right?
That's why I was there the minute they opened the doors in New York. No, those are great points. And I think that's what we're going to see. And I think you're right. I think women are going to be like, sure, honey, Trump all the way, baby. And then they go in there and do their thing. I personally think Mitch McConnell's going to vote for Kamala Harris, but that's just me. But he'll tell everybody he loves Trump. Never know. Gretchen, thanks so much for coming back on. Great insights. Fingers crossed for Tuesday.
Great to see you again. Thanks.
Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast. and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.